Nomaza Nongqunga Coupez. I'm a South African that is now based in the south of France for the past 13 years. I'm the founder of Undiscovered Canvas and also the founder of Makwande Art Residency. Now, Undiscovered Canvas is a boutique agency, a private boutique agency that promotes African artists through exhibitions and also through a dynamic online marketplace. However, Makwande Art Residency, on the other side, is an NGO that aims at welcoming young and emerging African women into the south of France in a residential atmosphere whereby they can come, have their careers accelerated, and at the same time be able to be inspired by the south of France. Personally, I think that African art is becoming trendy today because of the fact that there's globalization, luckily for us, which means that people who are gate players and we're kind of like holding the young talent coming from the African continent into entering into the international market. Unfortunately, now they are being bypassed, especially by the internet. So as a result, through Instagram, through Facebook, artists are literally showing their art, and because they're extremely talented, no one can deny their talent. So I think that is one of the reasons that African art is quite popular at the moment. The other one is because of the fact that globally, because of globalization, the social issues that we're talking about now do affect a lot of people living in the African continent and as well as the diaspora. So we're kind of like sharing the same histories, and because we're sharing the same histories, artists through their works are able to portray these histories. So we're kind of like meeting now on the internet and kind of like sharing the same things. And I think that is one factor that is also contributing to the fact that African art is on the rise at the moment. It's a good question to ask, how do I choose which artists I represent within Undiscovered Canvas, because the African continent consists out of 54 countries. Undiscovered Canvas is a one-woman-run organization, so there is no way I can be able to work with everyone. So I had to be really intentional on the artists that I represent. I went and looked geographically. So I'm from South Africa, so it became natural for me to represent artists that are from South Africa. Then as I grew, I kind of like also grew my audience and the artists that I represent. So today, I'm representing artists coming from the Southern Hemisphere of Africa. So that is from Nigeria up until South Africa. How do I choose these artists? That's another story, because sometimes I feel that these artists basically choose me than anything else. However, it is I'm working on a very particular market, which is basically the French people, the Europeans. So I know that the artists that I bring into the scene must be artists that are extremely extremely talented. They must, even if they are self-taught, they must be able to really be able to talk about their artworks, be able to conceptualize. Artists that are able to conceptualize are quite important for me. Thirdly, it must be artists that are using innovative materials. I'm always intrigued by artists that are using innovative materials to be able to express their expressions. So those are the type of tools that I use to be able to kind of like identify the type of artists that I represent within Undiscovered Canvas. Makwande Art Residency is located in the south of France in a small village called Mandelieu-le-Napoule. Now, Mandelieu-le-Napoule is part of the French Riviera. Why did I choose the south of France, and why did I choose the French Riviera to be the area whereby I welcome young and emerging African women? The answer is simple. This area is the area whereby all the masters came in. We have the best light of whole of Europe. Artists from all over the world. When I talk about artists from all over the world, I'm talking about Van Gogh, I'm talking about Matisse, I'm talking about extremely huge artists that came into the south of France for the light, coming from all over Europe. These artists were coming at a particular time in their lives, because when they arrived in south of France, some of them were in their 40s, 50s, so they had really had a huge career before that. So the type of works that they produced whilst they were on the French Riviera are very significant in the sense that they had a sense of audacity. in their production. They were not producing out of ego anymore. They were enjoying the environment. They were expressing themselves differently. I find that very fascinating, to be able for a young artist who's starting out in their career to come firstly and foremost to be inspired by the same area, the same environment that inspired masters, but at the same time to kind of see how they produced when they were at their best. The biggest challenge that is facing African women on the continent at the moment is gender violence. It is the one thing that we're struggling with collectively throughout the whole continent. And as a result, effectively, all artists are talking about this. We all know an artist cannot do otherwise but reflect their times. So in most of the works that I get to represent, especially from the female artists, that fight, that voice is always present, whereby they are trying to talk about gender violence, especially in South Africa, where femicide is at its highest at the moment. African art and spirituality, this has always been an intertwined relationship. I think one needs to note that African artists in the olden days did not produce art out of leisure. African art was done for a purpose. So for example, to beautify the home, so the woman would put colors outside their mud houses to be able to beautify the homes, to identify which tribe they're coming from. So different patterns will belong to different tribes, and then those patterns will then be reproduced within the villages outside their homes. Spirituality, healing, for example, if somebody is not falling pregnant, the link between the ancestors and the living being. So if a lady is having a hard time falling pregnant, to be able to ask the ancestors to talk on behalf of the woman so that she can fall pregnant, two statues will be produced so that there could be a prayer offered to the ancestors. If there's a problem with somebody in the family, if somebody is sick, there would be an erected statue to be able to communicate with the ancestors. So for us, for most African countries throughout the whole continent, art has always been a necessity, not just aesthetics. So that's quite important. Honestly, even today, it still exists in that format, but today it's more also of an aesthetic being. You have artists, for example, I have an artist in my portfolio. His name is Matthias Shirombo. He's from Zimbabwe, from the Shona culture. Matthias channels when he works, just like Shangal did. You know, we all know that Shangal is said to have been lived upon artist. The same thing with Matthias Shirombo, where he channels into the canvas. So whatever he pours into the canvas, it's not something that is in a living space anymore. He's between worlds. And I've exhibited his works all over the world, and everyone, black and white, when they're in front of his works, they always say to me, Nomaza, I feel like I'm in a sacred space. The artist has arrived at creating a sacred space. So the canvas is no longer a canvas anymore, but it's a place whereby souls, messages that can be completely different from one person to the other. So that practice is still much so maintained within the African continent, but today obviously in ways that are more contemporary. If somebody is looking at investing in African art, this is the right time. As we all know, African art is on the rise in the international market, but the advice that I would have is that look at young and emerging artists. We are not on the secondary market yet, so you are able to really have young and emerging artists at extremely affordable price, but the rate that they are rising on, it means that they can be artists that are worth investment quite soon. So I would then advise them to look at agencies like mine, Undiscovered Canvas, have a look at the artworks and the artists that I represent on that platform. If they're in a position to visit an African country, have a look at the universities, the students that are coming out from universities in those countries, and buy artworks from them at that moment. Also, Instagram is a huge source whereby you can have artists representing themselves directly, independently, and selling their artworks on Instagram. One needs to be invested without a doubt, So if one would just take a little bit of time and see what is happening within the African market and really go for young and emerging artists, that's what I would advise. But even more importantly, as a collector, I always say you have to buy what you love. So supporting those artists that you feel that they have something strong, you feel that they have something to say, give them the support so that they can be able to grow. That for me is one of the biggest things I would advise a collector to do. Being an advisor to President Emmanuel Macron, without a doubt, has been one of the most humbling experiences of my life. There were so many beautiful lessons that I learned from just being in the same room with him and being able to influence him and also advise him and make him take decisions that would benefit the African continent. It gave me an opportunity to learn and see how an old institution like France operated from an extremely high level, the presidential level. I got to see the limitations that it has, and I got to see the opportunities that it represented. I was lucky enough to travel with the president into some African countries like Burkina Faso, Ghana, and also Nigeria. And to be able to also, within those travels, to meet institutions like Institut Français on behalf of the president was an eye-opener, because, as I said, it showed me to what point the relationship between France and the relationship between different countries in Africa, there was just so much to be done to be able to bridge the cultural differences. There's so much work that needs to be done. However, there are a lot of challenges as well, because the institution is quite old, very, very old, and to be able for it to maneuver and to be able for it to change will take a lot. But I was extremely happy to have contributed in what we call the season 2020, where I advised the president to have the Africa 2020 season that took place 2 years ago, and also to take him to Nigeria at the shrine, which was something that nobody believed was possible, and it ended up being one of the most beautiful trips that he's ever done in Africa. So for me, it was an eye-opener, a humbling experience, and I got to learn so many beautiful things and learn so many and meet so many beautiful people, and some of which I still continue to work with even today.
Funny question.
Very.